A pregnant wife lies in a hospital room, her fragile pregnancy hanging by a thread, in a place that should have been completely safe. But safety vanishes the moment a jealous mistress bursts through the door and attacks her, while the baby in her womb fights for every heartbeat. And the husband who should have protected her? He stands there. He turns his back. He leaves her on the floor. But what they don't know is that someone else is watching. A man who rules Chicago's underworld with an iron fist. A man who has one unbreakable rule: no one harms a pregnant woman. Not on his watch, not ever. What follows is a collision of betrayal, fear, and the kind of justice that no courtroom can deliver, because when the Mafia decides to protect someone, they protect with everything they have. And when they decide to punish, there is no place dark enough to hide. Trust me, you will not believe how far this story goes until we step inside it. If you are listening to this and feel that the story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from, and leave a comment below so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us. Morning at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital in Chicago unfolded beneath a gray winter sky, the kind that seemed to press low over the city. Fine flakes of snow drifted past the windows, laying a delicate sheet of white over the streets as if trying to hide the darker corners beneath. Inside the hospital, a cold wash of fluorescent light flooded the corridors, glinting off pristine white walls and polished tile floors. The sharp scent of disinfectant seeped into every crevice, blending with the dry air from the central ventilation system. The high-risk maternity ward was on the 5th floor, set apart from the noise of the other departments, a place where every steady beep of a monitor carried both hope and fear for women fighting to hold on to the small lives growing inside them. This was where life and death sat only a heartbeat apart, where nurses moved softly like shadows, and every sound was kept as low as possible. In private room number 312, Olivia Grace Bennett lay on a narrow white hospital bed, a thin blanket pulled over the rounded swell of her belly in the 7th month of pregnancy. She was 27 years old, with long brown hair spread over the pillow and hazel eyes fixed on the ceiling above her. Her skin was paler than usual, her lips dry and cracked from lack of water, and the dark hollows under her eyes told anyone who cared to look that she had not slept well for many nights. The blood pressure monitor beside the bed showed troubling readings the doctor had warned her about that morning. High blood pressure, risk of preeclampsia, close monitoring required. Those clinical words echoed in her mind like a sentence passed down from an unseen judge. Olivia placed her hand over her belly, feeling the gentle kicks of the child inside. It was the only thing that still made her want to keep fighting. She closed her eyes, and memories rose up inside her like a tide she could not hold back. She remembered the cold room in Street Agnes Orphanage, where she had lived for 10 years after her parents died in a car accident when she was only 8. She remembered winter nights curled up on a narrow iron bed, the mocking laughter of other children when she wore clothes that were torn and worn out, the gnawing ache of hunger when the older kids stole her portion of food. No one wanted to adopt a thin, timid little girl whose eyes were always wet. She grew up surrounded by lack, teaching herself how to survive, teaching herself to read in the public library, working part-time jobs so she could save enough money for college. She became a nurse not out of passion but because it was the shortest path to a steady job. She had been fighting on her own for as long as she could remember, and when she met Ryan, she truly believed she had finally found a safe harbor. Olivia opened her eyes and turned her head toward the window. Chicago stretched beyond the glass, tall buildings blurred by snowfall, busy streets filled with people rushing through their day. She had lived in this city for 5 years, but she had never felt as alone as she did now. She thought of Ryan, the man she had loved and trusted. They had met 3 years earlier in a small coffee shop near the hospital where she worked. He had looked sharp and polished, charming and courteous, with a disarming smile and sweet words that melted her guarded heart. He told her he was a successful businessman, told her he loved her, told her he wanted to take care of her for the rest of her life. And she, an orphan who had never truly known what it meant to be cherished, believed every word. They married after 1 year of dating, and she thought her life had finally found its happy ending. But the first cracks appeared soon after the wedding. Secret phone calls, late nights returning home with a strange perfume lingering on his shirt, cold glances taking the place of the gentle looks he had once given her. She ignored it all, talking herself into believing he was simply busy with work. She was afraid of losing the only thing she had, afraid of being pushed back into the solitary life she had escaped. Then she became pregnant. She thought the baby would change everything, would bind them together again. Instead, Ryan drifted even further away. He had not been happy when he heard the news, had not gone with her to prenatal appointments, had not once placed his hand on her belly to feel their child growing inside her. Olivia sighed and smoothed her hand over her stomach. The baby kicked again, as if trying to comfort her. She whispered so softly that no one else could hear. "Baby, no matter what happens, I will protect you. I promise." Footsteps sounded in the hall, coming closer. Olivia's heart stumbled and then raced. She turned her head toward the door, a fragile spark of hope flickering in her eyes. It could be Ryan. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he had come to be with her. She hated herself for still hoping, but she could not stop. Hope was all she had left. The door to the hospital room slowly opened. Ryan Michael Carter walked in with the air of a man hurrying to a place he did not truly wish to be. He was 33, tall, with neatly combed black hair and a handsome, sharply defined face that could have belonged to an old movie star. A charcoal suit, expertly tailored, fit closely over his well-proportioned frame. A Rolex watch gleamed on his wrist, and his leather shoes shone without a trace of dust. On the surface, he was the very picture of a successful businessman, the kind of man many women might dream of, but his eyes told another story. They were cold as ice, without warmth, without even a flicker of tenderness as they turned toward the wife lying in the bed. He stepped into the room, but his gaze stayed fixed on the screen of his phone, his thumb moving steadily as if whatever glowed there mattered more than anything within these four walls. Olivia tried to shape her lips into a smile when she saw him. Her heart beat faster, part hope and part fear. "You came." Her voice was weak and hoarse, rough from staying silent all morning. Ryan did not answer at once. He walked a few more steps into the room and stopped, leaning against the wall opposite the bed instead of taking the empty chair by her side. The space between them was only a few yards, but to Olivia it felt like a chasm no one could cross. "Yeah, I stopped by for a minute." He finally spoke, his voice flat and even, stripped of feeling. "What did the doctor say?" Olivia swallowed, fighting back the wave of disappointment rising in her chest. "My blood pressure is still high. The doctor says I need to stay for a few more days for observation. They are worried about preeclampsia." Ryan nodded mechanically, his eyes never leaving his phone. "Then just stay here and rest." Olivia's heart seemed to tighten in a painful grip. She reached a hand toward him, a small, desperate gesture for connection. "Could you stay with me for a little while? I am really scared. The doctor said stress is not good for the baby, and I need you here with me." Ryan let out a heavy sigh, the kind that made her feel as if her simple request were a burden too great to bear. "I have an important meeting, Olivia. The company is in a critical phase. I cannot just skip it. You always have an important meeting." The words slipped from Olivia's lips before she could catch them. She saw a flash of annoyance in his eyes and hurried to soften her tone. "I'm sorry, I did not mean it that way. I just wanted to say I miss you. I need you." Ryan did not reply. His phone buzzed in his hand, and he glanced down at the screen. For a brief moment, Olivia saw the corners of his mouth lift in a smile. It was not the polite smile he used for business partners, nor the tense smile of a man handling work problems. It was gentle, warm, the kind of smile he used to give her in those first days when they had just met. But now, that smile did not belong to her anymore. "Who is that, Ryan?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. Ryan quickly wiped the smile from his face and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. "A colleague. Nothing important." He glanced at his watch again, for the third time since he had entered the room. Olivia noticed, and a chill spread slowly through her chest. He was waiting for something, or someone. Ryan checked his watch once more, then straightened, pushing away from the wall as if his duty here had been fulfilled. "I have to go. Try to rest. I will come back later." Olivia wanted to scream, wanted to grab his jacket and demand to know why he was treating her this way. But she did not. She thought of the baby inside her, remembered what the doctor had said about keeping calm. She forced the tears burning in her eyes to stay where they were, swallowing them back until her throat almost closed. "When will you come back?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Ryan had already turned away and was walking toward the door. "When I have time," he answered without looking back, his tone level and empty of sincerity. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but to Olivia the sound crashed like thunder. She lay there alone in the stark white room, one hand resting on her belly, and for the first time she allowed the tears to roll down her cheeks. She did not understand what she had done wrong. She did not understand how the man who had once promised to love her for life could now be so cold. Yet deep inside, a small, quiet voice whispered things she did not dare admit, that something was very wrong. that Ryan was hiding something from her, that the smile on his face when he read that message had not been for any colleague. Olivia closed her eyes, trying to drive away the dark thoughts. She did not know that the truth would be worse than anything she could imagine, and it would soon come knocking on her door in the cruelest way. At the same time, a drive of about 20 minutes from St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, a meeting was taking place in the vast study of the Russo estate on Lakeshore Drive, one of the most expensive stretches of Chicago, where multi-million-dollar mansions looked out over Lake Michigan with a view so stunning that only the wealthiest and most powerful could afford it. The Russo residence was a work of classic architecture with white marble columns, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a broad garden enclosed by a high iron fence tipped with sharp spikes. From the outside, it looked like the home of some old aristocratic family, but anyone who had lived in Chicago long enough knew the Russo empire had not been built on inherited money or respectable business. Dominic Alexander Russo sat behind an enormous oak desk, his back resting against a black leather chair, his hands resting on the arms like a king on a throne. He was 36 years old, taller than 1.85 meters, with a powerful body hardened by years of ruthless training. His black hair, faintly wavy, was brushed back from his forehead, revealing a high brow and thick eyebrows. His face might have been carved from stone, with a square jaw, a straight high nose, and storm-gray eyes so cold they made anyone who met them shiver. People said Dominic Russo had not truly smiled once since his mother died 26 years earlier. They also said that anyone who dared betray him vanished without a trace. Standing opposite the desk was Luca Giovanni Moretti, 34 years old, Dominic's right hand and closest friend since childhood. Luca was tall as well, leaner in build, with neatly cropped brown hair and sharp brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He held an electronic tablet in his hand, reading out the list of names that needed to be taken care of during the coming week. "Next is Ryan Michael Carter," Luca said in an even tone. "He owes $2 million to our casino on the west side. The debt is 3 months overdue. He keeps promising to pay, but he never does." Dominic said nothing, only gave a slight nod for Luca to continue. "We have been watching him. He is not a businessman like he claims. In truth, he is a professional conman with a criminal record." "Where is he?" Dominic asked, his voice low and cold as winter wind blowing over Lake Michigan. "St. Michael's Memorial Hospital," Luca answered. "His wife is there. She is pregnant." The fingers of Dominic's hand, which had been tapping lightly on the arm of the chair, went still. For a moment his whole body seemed to turn to stone. The word pregnant rang in his mind like an alarm bell, dragging him back to a memory he had tried to bury for more than 2 decades. He had been 10 years old, playing in the living room when he heard screaming from upstairs. He ran up the stairs, pushed open the door to his parents' bedroom, and saw his mother lying on the floor. Isabella Russo, the most gentle and beautiful woman he had ever known, was sprawled in a pool of blood, her hands clutching her belly swollen with a 6-month pregnancy. The attacker had already fled, but the damage was done. That night his mother lost the baby sister he had never had the chance to meet, and 3 days later she died from massive blood loss and infection. Dominic had stood by her hospital bed, holding her hand until it went cold, and there at her side he had sworn, to her soul, that he would never allow the same thing to happen to any pregnant woman ever again. Never. "Boss?" Luca's voice pulled Dominic back into the present. "Send a man to the hospital at once," Dominic said slowly, each word clear and final like a command carved in stone. "Watch Ryan Carter. Report every move he makes to me, and make sure nothing happens to that woman. Understand?" Luca nodded without asking a single question. He had worked with Dominic long enough to know when not to speak. He pulled out his phone and began to make a call. 20 minutes later, a man in a black suit was standing in the corner of the hallway in the high-risk maternity unit of St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, his eyes fixed on the door of room number 312. He did not know who he was protecting. He only knew it was an order from Dominic Russo, and no one in their right mind disobeyed the boss. 30 minutes after Ryan left, Olivia was still lying on the hospital bed, her eyes red and swollen, tracks of dried tears marking her cheeks. She had tried to sleep as the doctor advised, but her mind kept spinning with questions that had no answers. Who was that smile for? Why had he kept glancing at his watch? Why could he not stay with her for even a single hour? She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the faint movements of the baby, and tried to tell herself she was overthinking everything. Maybe Ryan was simply under pressure at work. Maybe he would change when the baby was born. Maybe everything would be all right. She had just closed her eyes, trying to let go of the dark thoughts, when the hospital room door flew open with a loud crash. Olivia jerked upright, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. For a split second, She thought it might be a nurse or a doctor coming in for a check, but the person who stepped inside was none of them. A woman stood in the doorway, breathing hard, her eyes burning with pure hatred. She looked to be around 29, with hair the color of fire falling to her shoulders, porcelain white skin, and a sharply beautiful face framed by lips painted a deep blood red. She wore a tight black dress that hugged her curves, red high heels, and a designer handbag swung from one shoulder. At a glance, she might have walked straight off the cover of a fashion magazine, but her eyes were utterly unhinged, the eyes of a wild animal closing in on its prey. "Who are you?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. Instinctively, she tugged the blanket higher, as if the thin fabric could shield her and the child inside her. The red-haired woman stepped fully into the room and slammed the door shut behind her. "Who am I?" she echoed, then let out a high, brittle laugh steeped in bitterness. "I am Vanessa Blair Collins. And you little bitch, you stole my man." Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Vanessa. The name rang through her mind like a warning bell. She had never heard Ryan mention that name, but with the wordless certainty of a woman she understood at once. This was the one who had been sending him messages. This was the reason he smiled at his phone. This was the secret he had been hiding from her all along. "I do not understand what you are talking about," Olivia said, forcing her voice to stay calm, though her heart was thudding so hard it hurt. "I did not steal anyone. Ryan is my husband." "Your husband?" Vanessa repeated, walking closer, each step of her heels on the tile floor beating out the seconds until disaster. "Ryan was mine before he ever met you. He and I were together for 3 years. Then you showed up with that pathetic, innocent act of yours and he decided to marry you because you are easier to fool. You think he loves you. You think he wants this little family. He only needs you for one reason, and when that reason is gone, he will come back to me." Every word out of Vanessa's mouth cut into Olivia's heart like a knife. She wanted to scream that it was a lie, that Ryan loved her, that they were going to be a happy family, but deep inside she knew Vanessa was telling the truth. All the signs she had refused to see suddenly stood out in cruel clarity. "Please," Olivia said, her voice turning into a plea. "I am pregnant. Whatever has happened between you and Ryan, please calm down. We can talk." "Pregnant," Vanessa repeated, stopping to let her gaze drop to the round curve of Olivia's belly, her expression twisting with disgust. "That baby should have been mine. I should have been the one carrying Ryan's child. But you stole everything. You stole him. You stole my future. You stole it all." Vanessa launched herself forward so quickly that Olivia did not have time to react. Fingers tipped with nails, painted the color of fresh blood, grabbed the collar of her hospital gown and yanked her toward the edge of the bed. Olivia screamed, her hands pushing weakly at Vanessa's arms, but she was too fragile and Vanessa moved like a woman possessed. "Let me go," Olivia sobbed. "My baby. Please think of my baby." But Vanessa did not hear her, or did not care. She kept pulling and shaking, shouting a stream of venomous words. The monitor beside the bed rattled as its cables were stretched taut. The beeping of the fetal heart rate changed in an instant from a steady rhythm to a chaotic alarm of irregular sounds. Numbers flickered wildly on the screen, and Olivia felt a stabbing pain slice through her abdomen. "Help me!" she screamed, hoping someone in the hallway would hear her. "Please, someone help me, please!" Vanessa slapped her, a blow so hard it snapped Olivia's head to the side. "Shut up," Vanessa snarled. "No one is going to save you. No one cares about you. You are just a pathetic little orphan that Ryan used. And now I am going to take back what belongs to me." At that moment the door opened again. Olivia turned her head and her heart flared with desperate hope when she saw Ryan standing in the doorway. He had come back. He would save her. He would drag Vanessa away and protect her and their child. "Ryan," she cried, her voice breaking with relief and despair. "I am begging you. Save me. Save our baby." At that moment, about 20 minutes from St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, a meeting was underway in the grand study of the Russo estate on Lakeshore Drive, one of the most expensive stretches of Chicago where multi-million-dollar mansions faced Lake Michigan with views so breathtaking only the wealthiest and most powerful could ever claim them. The Russo estate was a piece of classic architecture, all white marble columns and floor-to-ceiling glass windows, with a wide garden wrapped in by a high iron fence crowned with sharp spear points. From the outside, it looked like the home of some old noble family, but anyone who had lived in Chicago long enough knew the Russo empire had not been built on inherited fortune or clean business. Dominic Alexander Russo sat behind a massive oak desk, his back resting against a black leather chair, his hands spread on the armrests like a king on his throne. He was 36 years old, taller than 1.85 meters, his powerful frame honed by years of brutal training. His black hair had a slight wave and was brushed back from his forehead, showing a high brow and thick dark eyebrows. His face looked as if it had been carved from stone, all square jaw and straight high nose, and storm-gray eyes so cold that anyone who met them felt a shiver run down their spine. People said Dominic Russo had not truly smiled once since his mother died 26 years ago. They also said that those who dared to betray him disappeared without leaving a trace. Standing opposite the desk was Luca Giovanni Moretti, 34 years old, Dominic's right hand, and closest friend since childhood. Luca was tall as well, though leaner, with short, neatly cut brown hair and sharp brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. He held an electronic tablet in one hand, reading through a list of names they needed to deal with during the coming week. "Next is Ryan Michael Carter," Luca said, his voice steady. "He owes $2 million to our casino on the west side. The debt has been overdue for 3 months. He keeps promising to pay, but he never follows through." Dominic said nothing, only dipped his chin in a small nod for Luca to continue. "We've been watching him. He is not the businessman he claims to be. In reality, he is a professional con artist with a record." "Where is he?" Dominic asked, his voice low and cold, like winter wind sweeping in from Lake Michigan. "St. Michael's Memorial Hospital," Luca answered. "His wife is there. She is pregnant." The fingers of Dominic's hand, which had been tapping lightly on the arm of the chair, suddenly went still. For a heartbeat, his whole body seemed to turn to stone. The word pregnant echoed in his mind like a warning bell, dragging him back into a memory he had tried to bury for more than 2 decades. He was 10, playing in the living room when he heard screams from upstairs. He ran up the staircase, shoved open his parents' bedroom door, and saw his mother on the floor. Isabella Russo, the most beautiful and gentle woman he had ever known, lay in a pool of blood, her hands wrapped around her belly, 6 months heavy with life. The attacker had already fled, but the damage was done. That night his mother lost the baby sister he had never met, and 3 days later she died from massive blood loss and infection. Dominic had stood at her hospital bedside, holding her hand until it went cold, and there he had sworn to her spirit that he would never again allow anything like that to happen to any pregnant woman. Never. "Boss." Luca's voice pulled Dominic back to the present. "Send a man to the hospital now," Dominic said slowly. Every word sharp and unmistakable, a command no one would dare defy. "Follow Ryan Carter. Report every move he makes. And make sure nothing happens to that woman." "Understood." Luca nodded, asking no questions. He had worked with Dominic long enough to know when silence was the only wise choice. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. 20 minutes later, a man in a black suit was standing in a shadowed corner of the high-risk maternity hallway at St. Michael's Memorial, his gaze fixed on the door of room 312. He did not know who he was protecting. He only knew that this was an order from Dominic Russo, and no one with any instinct for survival ignored an order from the boss. 30 minutes after Ryan left, Olivia was still on the bed, her eyes swollen and red, tracks of tears drying on her cheeks. She had tried to sleep as the doctor had urged, but her mind spun in circles around questions that had no answers. Who had that smile been for? Why had he kept checking his watch? Why could he not stay for just a single hour? She laid a hand on her belly, feeling the faint movements of the baby, and tried to tell herself she was seeing too much, imagining too much. Maybe Ryan was simply under pressure at work. Maybe he would change once the baby was born. Maybe, somehow, things would turn out all right. She had just closed her eyes, forcing herself to release the darkest thoughts, when the door burst open with a crash that echoed off the walls. Olivia jerked upright, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. For an instant she thought it might be a nurse or a doctor coming to check on her. But the person in the doorway was neither. A woman stood there, her breaths ragged, her eyes blazing with hatred. She looked to be around 29, with hair as red as flame falling to her shoulders, porcelain pale skin, and sharp features framed by lips, painted a deep dark red. She wore a tight black dress that clung to her body, red high heels, and a designer handbag swinging from her shoulder. At first glance, she could have stepped straight off the glossy cover of a fashion magazine, but her eyes were wild, the eyes of a predator closing in. "Who are you?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. Instinct pulled the blanket higher over her body, as if that thin cloth could guard her and the child she carried. The red-haired woman stepped inside and slammed the door shut behind her. "Who am I?" she echoed, then let out a shrill, bitter laugh. "I am Vanessa Blair Collins. And you little bitch, you stole my man." Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Vanessa. The name rang through her mind like a siren. Ryan had never once spoken that name, but deep in her bones, in that wordless place where women know, she understood at once. This was the woman who had been texting her husband. This was the reason he had smiled at the screen. This was the secret he had kept locked away from her. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Olivia said, clinging to a calm tone while her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "I didn't steal anyone. Ryan is my husband." "Your husband," Vanessa repeated, coming closer, each sharp click of her heels on the tile like a countdown to disaster. "Ryan was mine before he ever met you. He and I were together for 3 years. Then you showed up with that pathetic little innocent act and he decided to marry you because you're easier to fool. You really think he loves you. You think he wants this cute little family. He only needs you for one reason. And when that reason is gone, he's coming back to me." Each word was a blade, driven straight into Olivia's chest. She wanted to scream that it was a lie, that Ryan loved her, that they were about to have a child and a life together. But somewhere deep inside, she knew Vanessa was laying bare a truth Olivia had refused to face. All the signs she had brushed aside rose up sharp and undeniable. "Please," Olivia said, her voice breaking into a plea. "I'm pregnant. Whatever happened between you and Ryan, please calm down. We can talk." "Pregnant," Vanessa repeated, stopping as her gaze dropped to the curve of Olivia's stomach, her expression twisting into disgust. "That baby should have been mine. I should have been the one carrying Ryan's child. But you stole everything. You stole him. You stole my future. You stole it all." Vanessa lunged forward so fast that Olivia had no time to react. Fingers tipped with nails painted the color of blood clamped onto the collar of Olivia's hospital gown and yanked hard. Olivia screamed, her hands pushing weakly at Vanessa's arms. But she was too frail, and Vanessa moved like someone possessed. "Let me go," Olivia sobbed. "My baby. Please, think of my baby." But Vanessa either could not hear or did not care. She kept pulling and shaking and hurling venomous words. The monitor beside the bed started to rattle as its cords were stretched tight. The steady beeping of the fetal heart monitor fractured into chaotic shrieks of warning. Numbers jumped wildly on the screen, and Olivia felt a stabbing pain rip through her abdomen. "Help me," she cried, her voice raw, hoping against hope that someone in the hallway would hear. "Please, someone help me. Please." Vanessa's hand whipped across her face in a slap so hard it snapped Olivia's head to the side. "Shut up," Vanessa snarled. "No one's going to save you. No one cares about you. You're just a pathetic little orphan that Ryan used, and now I'm taking back what's mine." At that moment the door opened again. Olivia turned her head, and her heart surged with wild, desperate hope when she saw Ryan standing in the doorway. He had come back. He would stop this. He would drag Vanessa away and shield her and their child. "Ryan," she cried, her voice breaking with relief and terror all tangled together. "I'm begging you. Save me. Save our baby." Ryan stood on the threshold, tall and handsome in his charcoal suit, and Olivia looked at him as if he were the only lifeline left in a drowning world. Tears streamed down her cheeks, the collar of her hospital gown torn where Vanessa's hands had yanked it, her body shaking uncontrollably. But seeing her husband there, she felt a small, fragile flame of hope flare in her chest. He had come back. He would save her. "Ryan, save me," she cried again, her voice so desperate it sounded like it might splinter. "She's lost her mind. She wants to kill me and the baby. Please, call security, call the police, do something." But Ryan did not move. He stood there like a statue, hands hanging loosely at his sides, not a single gesture suggesting he intended to step in. Olivia waited, her heart thudding heavier and heavier, and slowly the spark of hope began to die as she looked into his eyes. There was no fear there, no worry, no anger for the woman attacking his pregnant wife. All she saw was a calculating chill, the gaze of someone watching a play whose final act had already been written, a man merely waiting for the scene to unfold as planned. He knew. The thought sliced through her mind like a bolt of lightning. He knew Vanessa would come. He had arranged this. "Ryan," she whispered, no longer pleading but asking, her voice thick with raw hurt. "Why aren't you helping me?" Vanessa laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that filled the room. Her grip on Olivia's collar did not loosen, but her eyes turned toward Ryan, glittering with triumph. "You still don't get it, do you, you idiot?" she sneered. "He's not here to save you. He's here to watch me finish the job." "No," Olivia breathed, shaking her head, refusing to accept what she was seeing and hearing. "That's impossible. Ryan loves me. We're about to have a baby. He can't do this." Ryan finally spoke, and his voice was so cold that a shiver ran through her. "Love," he said, his mouth curling in a faint, contemptuous smile. "You really think I married you for love? You're just a tool, Olivia. An orphan nobody cares about. No family, no friends. Perfect for my plans." The words hit her like bullets, each one shattering another piece of her. She felt the world around her collapse, piece by piece, like a sandcastle crumbling under the tide. 3 years she had loved this man, trusted him, given him everything she had, and it had all been nothing but a con. Vanessa did not wait another second. She shoved Olivia backward with all her strength, and Olivia, weak and dizzy, could not catch herself. She toppled from the bed, her body slamming into the side of the monitor stand. The machine crashed to the floor with a harsh crack, cables and sensors ripping free from her skin. The screen shattered and an alarm began to scream, ripping through the quiet of the maternity ward. Olivia lay sprawled on the cold tile, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly as pain surged through her. It was not just the pain of the fall, but something deeper, from the very place where her child was fighting to hang on. "My baby," she sobbed, her voice barely more than a breath. "Please, don't hurt my baby. I'm begging you." She lifted her head and looked up at Ryan through a blur of tears, clinging to the wild hope that he might change his mind, that he might remember the soft moments they had shared, that he might recognize the life inside her as his own. But Ryan only looked back at her with empty eyes, as if she were nothing more than an obstacle to be cleared away. He gave Vanessa a small nod, a tiny gesture that carried devastating weight. It was a signal, an approval, a confirmation that he agreed with everything that was happening. Vanessa moved to his side and slid her arm through his, as if they were leaving a romantic dinner instead of walking away from a pregnant woman they had just attacked. Together they turned and walked out, leaving Olivia on the floor amid twisted cords and shattered glass. Ryan did not hurry. He did not rush like a man fleeing a crime. He walked slowly, almost leisurely, like someone finishing a job and leaving the scene with quiet satisfaction. The door closed and Olivia was alone. The alarm screamed on. Footsteps began to pound in the hallway outside, but to her they sounded distant and far away. She lay on the freezing tile, her arms still cradling her belly, feeling hot tears slide down her cheeks and drip onto the floor. The pain in her abdomen was growing fiercer, and she knew her baby was in danger. Yet sharper than any physical pain was the tearing in her heart, the total collapse of every belief, every hope, every dream of a happy family she had carried for so many years. Her vision began to blur, shadows creeping in at the edges until the world dimmed. Just before she slipped into unconsciousness, she whispered a single sentence, her voice so faint it was almost nothing at all. "Ryan abandoned me." Outside room, 312, the man in the black suit stood frozen, his eyes wide with horror after witnessing everything through the small window in the door. His name was Marco, one of the most trusted men in the Russo family, who had worked for Dominic for 10 years and had seen more than his share of brutal scenes in the underworld. But what he had just watched made his stomach twist. A man standing there while his pregnant wife was attacked, nodding his approval, then walking away as if nothing had happened. He had watched Ryan Carter and the red-haired woman step out of the room and walk down the hallway with chilling calm. They even laughed together, like two people finishing a pleasant lunch instead of walking away from a crime. Marco had let them pass without stepping in because he knew his orders were to watch and report, not to act. But as soon as they disappeared at the end of the corridor, he pulled out his phone and dialed Dominic's number. The call was answered after 2 rings. "Boss, code red," Marco said, his voice urgent yet still carrying the clarity of a man well used to emergencies. At the Russo estate, Dominic had been in his office, reviewing paperwork tied to the family's business interests. At the words "code red," he stopped, every muscle tightening like a big cat about to spring. "Report," he said, his voice short and icy. "Ryan Carter's wife has just been attacked," Marco replied swiftly. A red-haired woman stormed into the room and beat her. And Ryan Carter? He was there. He stood and watched. He did nothing. He nodded at the woman, and they both left. "She's on the floor, boss. She's pregnant and she's on the floor." Dominic's face, already cold, turned glacial, like the surface of Lake Michigan in the cruelest winter. His jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his temple, and his storm-gray eyes darkened with a fury boiling up from somewhere deep. His left hand closed into a fist so tight the knuckles went white, veins standing out beneath his skin. For a moment, he wasn't the powerful 36-year-old mafia boss who ruled a city's shadows. He was a 10-year-old boy again, staring helplessly as his mother bled on the floor, unable to save her. But this time would be different. This time he had power. This time he would not stand still. "Where are Ryan Carter and the woman?" Dominic asked, his voice like sharpened steel. "They just left the hospital, boss. I have men tailing them." Dominic rose, tall and terrifying in his black suit. "No one leaves that hospital," he ordered, each word a death sentence waiting to be carried out. "Keep eyes on them. I'm on my way." He ended the call and turned to Luca, who had already gotten to his feet the moment he heard code red. "Get the car," Dominic said. Luca did not ask why, did not ask how bad it was. He simply nodded and ran. At Street, Michael's Memorial Hospital. Chaos had swallowed the high-risk maternity unit. The alarm from room 312 had brought every nurse and doctor on duty running. They pushed the door open and saw Olivia lying motionless on the floor amid cables and shattered plastic, her hands clamped around her belly. "Dear God," a nurse gasped. "Get the attending physician now. Prep the emergency obstetrics room." Everything happened in a whirlwind of shouted orders and rushing feet. 2 nurses lifted Olivia with desperate care while another checked her vital signs. A fresh monitor was wheeled in. Sensors quickly pressed against her abdomen to pick up the baby's heart. A faint beeping answered, the sound of life, but the rhythm was shaky and uneven. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high," the on-call doctor shouted after one glance at the screen. "Signs of internal bleeding. Get her to the emergency room right now. Prepare blood units." Paige, the chief obstetrician. Olivia was placed on a gurney and rushed out, rolling down the hallway at breathless speed. The overhead lights streaked past her like blurred halos, and the steady rumble of the wheels on tile became a drumbeat driving them toward whatever came next. She remained unconscious, her face ashen, but her lips moved faintly as if she were still trying to speak. Outside the hospital, a sleek black Mercedes tore through the Chicago streets, easily pushing past the speed limit. Dominic sat in the back seat, staring straight ahead, his face set in stone. Luca gripped the steering wheel, knowing better than to break the heavy silence. Dominic had given an order, and when Dominic Russo gave an order, the entire underworld of Chicago listened. Those who did not obey paid with their lives. In the obstetric emergency room of St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, harsh white light poured down from the surgical lamps overhead, the icy breath of the air conditioning mixing with the sharp sting of antiseptic to create an atmosphere so tense it felt hard to breathe. Olivia lay motionless on the emergency table, her body still, her face as pale as wax, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses moving with dizzying speed. The head of obstetrics, a middle-aged man with graying hair and keen eyes behind his glasses, studied the numbers on the monitor with a deeply troubled expression. "Blood pressure 180/120, he called out, his voice tight. "She is in severe preeclampsia. Fetal heart rate weak, only 100 beats per minute and still dropping. Signs of partial placental abruption. We have a high risk of preterm delivery." A nurse quickly slid an intravenous needle into Olivia's arm, starting fluids and medication to lower her blood pressure. Another nurse placed monitoring electrodes across her abdomen, and at once the screen beside her lit up with jagged, uneven waves. The beeping of the monitor came in relentless bursts, each sound a reminder that 2 lives were hanging by a thread. "Prepare magnesium sulfate to prevent seizures," the doctor ordered. "Continue monitoring fetal heart rate every 5 minutes. If there is no improvement in the next 2 hours, we may need to perform an emergency cesarean." In the fog of semi-consciousness, Olivia began to murmur, words tumbling out in fragments. Her cracked lips moved and tears leaked from beneath her closed eyelids, sliding down her temples and soaking into the pillow. "Do not leave me," she whispered, her voice faint as a breath of air. "Please do not leave me. Do not leave me alone." A young nurse drawing up medication suddenly paused when she heard the words. She leaned closer, studying the patient's face, and her eyes widened in shock. Rachel Kim, 31 years old, had worked at this hospital for 5 years, and she knew exactly who the woman on the table was. "Liv," she breathed, stunned. "Oh my God, Olivia." Rachel had once worked in the same unit as Olivia before Olivia resigned to prepare for the baby. They had never been best friends, but they had shared long night shifts, paper cups of coffee in the break room, quiet conversations about life between emergencies. Rachel knew Olivia as a kind, hard-working woman who had always dreamed of a loving family. Seeing her like this made Rachel's heart clench. She stepped to the bedside, took Olivia's cold hand in hers, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Liv, stay with us," she said, pitching her voice just loud enough to slip through the fog of Olivia's unconsciousness. "Stay. Your baby needs you. Do not give up." Inside Olivia's mind, memories rose in a flood she could not hold back. She saw herself as a thin 8-year-old girl standing in the cold room of St. Agnes Orphanage, watching other children leave one by one with their adoptive parents. She had waited year after year, but no one chose her. She saw herself at 12, curled on a narrow bed on Christmas Eve, listening to the distant sounds of families laughing outside the orphanage walls while she lay alone in the dark. She saw herself at 16, standing at the orphanage gate with a worn bag in her hand, turned out because she was too old, with nowhere to go, no idea where her next step would lead. Her life had been a long, unbroken chain of being left behind. And now, once more, she had been abandoned by the one man she had trusted most. "Do not leave me," she murmured on, her voice drifting in the storm of drugs and pain. "Baby, do not leave me." The head of obstetrics watched the numbers on the screen, lines of worry deepening in his forehead. "Stabilize the mother first," he decided. "Controlling blood pressure and preventing seizures is our priority. Continue continuous fetal monitoring. If the fetal heart drops below 90 beats per minute, prepare for immediate cesarean delivery." Time crawled past in suffocating tension. Each minute stretched like an hour. Each beep of the monitor held everyone in the room on edge. Rachel never left Olivia's side, still holding her hand, still whispering encouragement. Doctors and nurses moved around them like shadows, pushing medication, adjusting machines, jotting down values. An hour passed. Olivia's blood pressure began to decrease, from 180 to 160, then 150. The fetal heart rate remained weak, but it did not drop further. 2 hours later, the head doctor finally exhaled a long, quiet breath as he studied the monitor. "Blood pressure has stabilized at 140/90, he announced, his voice carrying a note of relief. "Fetal heart rate has risen to 130 beats per minute, within normal range. She is stable. That baby is a real fighter." Rachel felt tears sting her eyes at his words. She looked down at Olivia's face, still pale but less taut with strain, and whispered, "You did it, Liv. You both did it." Olivia was transferred to a private room in the special care unit. She had not yet fully awakened, her eyes still closed, but her breathing had smoothed out, and her vital signs were steady. The monitor beside her bed now gave off slow, regular beeps, a gentle rhythm of life continuing on. Outside the window, the Chicago sky had shifted to the heavy gray of late afternoon, and snowflakes had begun to fall more thickly. But in this small room, 2 hearts kept beating, faint yet stubborn, refusing to surrender to a merciless fate. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of the main entrance of St. Michael's Memorial, and Dominic Alexander Russo stepped out with the bearing of a king entering his own domain. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a white shirt without a single wrinkle, and gleaming leather shoes. His dark hair was brushed back from his face, revealing hard chiseled features, a square jaw, and storm-gray eyes as cold as ice. Luca followed a step behind, close enough to act if needed, far enough to be unobtrusive. When Dominic walked through the sliding glass doors into the main lobby, something strange happened. People seemed to sense him before they actually saw him. Conversations faltered and fell silent, footsteps slowed, and one by one bodies shifted aside, an invisible path opening ahead of him. No one knew exactly who he was, but some ancient instinct of self-preservation whispered that he was not an ordinary man. Power radiated from him like an unseen field, pressing on the air around him, making those nearby lower their eyes and move away. Dominic ignored the curious, fearful looks turning in his direction. His stride was long and decisive, as he headed straight for the obstetric emergency department. At the reception desk, he stopped and fixed his unblinking gaze on the nurse seated behind the counter. "I need to see the doctor in charge of the recent emergency case," he said, his deep voice flat and metallic, more command than request. "The patient's name is Olivia Bennett." The nurse swallowed hard, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer force of the man standing before her. She fumbled at the keyboard, stammering, "Sir, I need to know who you are and your relationship to the patient before I can share any information." Dominic did not answer. He only looked at her, those cold eyes cutting straight through, and the poor woman felt herself freeze where she sat. She was just about to reach for the phone to call security when a familiar voice sounded from behind her. "It is all right, Lisa. I will take care of him." Dominic turned and saw a middle-aged woman approaching, her dark hair streaked with silver and pinned neatly back, her fine features framed by intelligent brown eyes, a white coat with the name Dr. Elena Maria Vasquez embroidered over her left breast pocket. She was 48 years old, one of the best obstetricians in Chicago, and more importantly, she had been the Russo family's private physician for nearly 20 years. Elena regarded Dominic with frank surprise. "Dominic, what are you doing here?" she asked once they had moved to a quieter corner of the hallway. I would not have guessed a public hospital is on the list of places you usually visit. The woman who was just brought in, Olivia Bennett, Dominic said, going straight to the point. How is she? Elena raised her brows, clearly not expecting Dominic to show concern for a patient he supposedly did not know, but she did not press him. After almost 2 decades working with the Russo family, she had learned that sometimes the wisest course was not to ask questions. She is stable, Elena reported in her calm, professional tone. We have her blood pressure under control and her seizure risk has decreased. The fetus is stable as well. Fetal heart rate is back within normal range. She does, however, need complete rest for at least the next few days. Any significant stress could cause serious complications. She is not to experience any stress whatsoever, Dominic said. I want her moved to the best private room in this hospital. Round-the-clock security, my men will stand guard outside. No one goes into her room without my approval. I will cover every medical expense. Elena studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read something in that austere face. Then she nodded. I will make the arrangements, she said. And Dominic, there is something you should know. This young woman, Olivia, she used to work here as a nurse. 2 years ago, she saved my life when I had a heart attack right here in the hospital. If it had not been for her, I would not be standing here talking to you. So, whatever you need done for her, I will make sure she receives the best care we can offer. Dominic said nothing, just dipped his head in a brief nod. Yet the information Elena had shared made him look at the woman in that room in a new light. She had saved Elena. She was a good person, and she had been betrayed by her own husband in the cruelest way imaginable. Elena led him down the corridor to the room where Olivia now lay. Through the narrow pane of glass in the door, Dominic could see her. Olivia lay motionless on the white bed, her brown hair spread over the pillow, her face pale with faint tracks of dried tears on her cheeks. She looked so small and fragile that it hurt to look at her, like a wounded bird lying in the middle of a snowstorm. One hand rested on the curve of her belly, still guarding the child inside even in her unconscious state. In that moment, something strange stirred in Dominic. His heart, frozen since the day his mother died 26 years ago, seemed to miss a beat. It was not the rhythm of anger or vengeance that he knew so well, but something softer, warmer, something he did not recognize. He did not understand it, and he was not certain he wanted to. Dominic stood there outside her door, a dark figure keeping watch. He did not go in, not wanting to disturb her sleep. He only stood, silent and steady, like the most faithful of sentries, and he knew, though he did not know why, that he would not leave until he was certain she was safe. 24 hours after the attack at the hospital, an emergency meeting took place in Dominic's office at the Russo estate, a vast room with dark oak paneled walls, bookshelves that rose all the way to the ceiling, and a long mahogany conference table large enough to seat 12 people, though today only 4 sat around it. Dominic occupied the head of the table, still in his customary black suit, his face as unmoving as stone, and his storm-gray eyes revealing nothing. On his right sat Luca, flipping through a thick file. On his left was Marcus Webb, 45 years old, the Russo family's private attorney, a man with salt and pepper hair and gold-rimmed glasses, who was known as one of the best criminal lawyers in Chicago. The last man at the table was Tony, the family's technology expert, a 30-year-old with wild hair and dark circles beneath his eyes, the look of someone who spent most nights in front of a computer screen. Report, Dominic ordered, his voice short and absolute. Luca opened the file and began to read, his tone even, though every word carried the weight of brutal truth. Ryan Michael Carter, 33 years old. He presents himself as a businessman, but in reality he is a professional con artist with 3 prior convictions for financial fraud and document forgery. He has changed his identity at least twice in the last 10 years to avoid prosecution. Dominic said nothing, merely motioned for Luca to go on. He owes our underground casino $2 million, Luca continued. The debt has accumulated over the last 2 years, and he has repeatedly promised to pay but has never done so. We were already preparing to put him on our priority list for action before the incident at the hospital. Tony, the information specialist, took over, pushing a laptop toward Dominic, the screen filled with documents. I hacked into the insurance company's system and found this, he said. 6 months ago, Ryan Carter purchased a life insurance policy on Olivia Bennett for $5 million. He is the sole beneficiary. More importantly, the policy includes a clause that doubles the payout if the death is due to an accident or an assault. The air in the room grew heavy and still. Marcus Webb removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead, his expression grave. This is clear evidence of premeditated murder, he said quietly. He did not marry her for love. He married her in order to kill her and collect the insurance. "And the woman who attacked her in the hospital?" Dominic asked, his voice frighteningly calm. "Vanessa Blair Collins, 29 years old," Luca said, turning to the next page. "She and Ryan Carter have been romantically involved for 4 years, which means their relationship began before he ever met Olivia. They never broke up. Ryan's marriage to Olivia was simply part of the plan. He chose Olivia because she is an orphan, no family, no one who would raise questions if she disappeared. Their plan is very clear. Marry Olivia, take out a life insurance policy on her, then let Vanessa take care of her, afterward collect the insurance money and vanish together." Dominic's hand slowly tightened on the arm of his chair. The skin over his knuckles went white as bone, veins standing out beneath the surface. His jaw clenched so hard it was possible to hear his teeth grinding. "He married her in order to kill her," Dominic said, each word slow, carved out of ice. He watched her being attacked, nodded his approval, and walked away. He left his own wife and his unborn child to die on a hospital floor. Memory crashed over him like a tidal wave that could not be held back. Dominic was 10 again, standing outside his parents' bedroom door, peering through the narrow gap. His mother, Isabella Russo, lay on the floor, her favorite pale green dress soaked in red. She was 6 months pregnant, and even as she bled out, her hand still tried to shield the roundness of her belly. The attacker was a member of a rival crew, sending a message to Dominic's father by striking the woman he loved most. Dominic remembered his own sobs, the useless desperation as he ran to his mother, his small hands pressing against wounds that would not stop bleeding. That night she lost the baby sister he had never met. 3 days later she died herself, leaving Dominic and his father alone in a world that suddenly seemed stripped of all light. The sound of the door opening pulled Dominic back into the present. Vincent Russo, 62 years old, former head of the Russo family, stepped into the room. He had retired 10 years earlier, passing power to his son, but he still lived in the estate and was still consulted on important decisions. His hair was now completely white, his face lined with the tracks of age and grief, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He stopped just inside, his gaze sweeping the room and coming to rest on his son's face. It was clear he had heard most of what had been said. "What are you planning to do?" "Dominic," Vincent asked, his voice low and rough. Dominic rose, tall and fearsome in his black suit, his storm-gray eyes burning with a hatred that had smoldered for 26 years. "What I should do with any man who dares harm a pregnant woman," he said. He turned to Luca, his voice turning to the cold edge of a blade. "Find Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins. I do not care where they are hiding, what rock they are under, or what hole in the ground they are using. Find them and bring them here, alive." Luca gave a tight nod, pushing back his chair and leaving the room at once. Marcus Webb and Tony also stood, understanding that the meeting was over and their work had only just begun. They left, and silence settled over the room, broken only by the faint creak of old wood. Only Dominic and Vincent remained. Father and son looked at each other for a long moment, and Vincent saw in his son's eyes the reflection of his own younger self, the man he had been 26 years earlier, when he had hunted down the one who murdered his wife. "Be careful, son," Vincent said softly. "Do not let rage blind you." Dominic did not answer. He turned his back and looked out the window, where Chicago lay wrapped in the darkness of a winter night. Somewhere out there, Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins were telling themselves they had escaped. They were wrong, terribly wrong. 3 days after the attack, Olivia slowly opened her eyes, soft light from the window spilling in and making her blink several times before she could see clearly. And the first thing she noticed was that the ceiling above her was not the plain white of the public hospital she knew so well, but a gentle cream color with delicate molding tracing the corners. She turned her head carefully, her blurred vision gradually sharpening, and what she saw left her so disoriented she wondered if she were still dreaming. The room she lay in looked nothing like any hospital room she had ever seen during her years as a nurse. It was at least 3 times the size of a standard ward, with walls painted in a soothing pastel green and gleaming wood floors instead of cold ceramic tile, and the bed beneath her was not the usual metal frame but a high-end wooden bed with a soft mattress and crisp white linens edged with fine embroidery. Beside her stood a solid oak nightstand topped with an elegant lamp, and dominating its surface, a huge vase overflowing with fresh white roses and pale pink lilies that filled the room with a faint, calming fragrance. In one corner sat a beige leather sofa set, a large flat-screen television hung on the wall, and a wide glass window opened onto a view of Chicago blanketed in snow. Olivia tried to sit up, but her body was so weak that she managed only to lift her head a little from the pillow. Her hand drifted down to her belly, and she exhaled a shaky breath of relief when she felt the familiar rounded shape still there. Her baby was still with her. The door opened, and Rachel came in, carrying a tray with medications and a glass of water, and when the nurse looked up and saw Olivia's eyes open, her face lit with unguarded joy. "Liv, you are awake," Rachel said, hastily setting the tray down before hurrying to the bedside to clasp Olivia's hand. "Dear God, you scared us half to death. You have been unconscious for 3 days." Olivia swallowed, her throat dry as dust. 3 days, she whispered, her voice rough. Rachel quickly poured water and held the glass to her lips, helping her drink in small, careful sips. "Yes," she said. "You were in severe preeclampsia, and you almost died, both you and the baby. But you are a fighter, Liv. You both are fighters." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather the scattered fragments of memory in her mind, and then suddenly it all swept back over her like a flood. The red-haired woman, the shouting, the sickening fall to the floor, and Ryan standing in the doorway, looking at her with eyes as cold as ice. "Where is Ryan?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where is my husband?" The smile faded from Rachel's face, as if someone had blown out a candle. She looked away, down at the floor, and her silence hurt more than any answer. Before Olivia could press her, the door opened again and Dr. Elena Maria Vasquez stepped in, wearing her white coat, her hair neatly pinned back, her face kind yet unmistakably professional. Olivia recognized her at once, the woman she had saved 2 years earlier when the doctor had collapsed with a heart attack in the hospital corridor. "Olivia, you are awake. That is very good," Elena said, as she came to the bed and pulled out her stethoscope, beginning her examination. "Your blood pressure is stable now, and your baby is doing very well. The fetal heartbeat is steady, no signs of abnormality. You will need several more days of rest, and you must avoid stress and worry as much as possible." Olivia nodded automatically, but her mind clung to a single question. "Where is my husband?" she asked again, her voice thinned to something close to pleading. "Why is he not here?" Elena paused, exchanging a brief glance with Rachel, then sat on the edge of the bed and took Olivia's hand in a motherly grip. "He has not come, Olivia," she said gently but without evasion. "In these 3 days, he has not appeared even once, but someone else has been here every day, making sure you receive the best care." Olivia stared at her, eyes shining with confusion and tears. "Who?" she asked. "Who has been here?" Elena hesitated before answering. "Someone who wants to be certain you are safe," she said. "He has paid all your medical bills, arranged this private room, and ordered guards to stand outside your door at all hours. I am not at liberty to say much more, but you will meet him very soon." Olivia did not understand any of it, did not understand why she lay in this luxurious room, who was paying for it, why Ryan had not come. And as she struggled to make sense of it all, the memory of the attack came back with merciless clarity. Vanessa's hand wrenching at her gown, the stream of vicious insults, the brutal impact with the floor, and then Ryan, standing in the doorway, making no move to save her, watching her with that remote glacial gaze, nodding once to Vanessa before turning and walking away, as if she were nothing more than a broken thing to be discarded. "He left me," Olivia whispered, her voice splintering like her heart. "He stood there and watched." He nodded, then he walked away. He just walked away. Tears poured down her cheeks, and this time she did not try to stop them. She wept for the marriage she had believed in, for the love she had thought she had found, for the child inside her who would grow up without a father, and for the orphaned girl she had once been, who had spent a lifetime searching for a family only to be betrayed by the one person she had trusted most. Rachel and Elena stood by, saying nothing, knowing there are wounds too deep for words to soothe. At that moment, the door opened once more. Olivia looked up through a blur of tears and saw a tall figure standing in the doorway, his outline haloed by the light from the hallway so that she could not at first make out his face, only the broad frame wrapped in a black suit and the steady gaze of storm-gray eyes fixed on her. The man entered the room with slow, measured steps, as though he quietly owned every space he walked into, and as the daylight from the window touched his face, Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen that face before, in the pages of the Chicago Tribune and in evening news segments about the city's underworld. The square jaw, the straight high bridge of his nose, the dark hair swept back from his brow, and those cold storm-gray eyes that could make a person shiver. Dominic Alexander Russo, the head of the Russo family, the man who ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist and a merciless code. "You are him," Olivia whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "Dominic Russo." Rachel and Elena stepped back as he moved further into the room, not out of fear but out of respect. And Dominic gave them a brief nod, a small gesture that was enough to tell both women they should leave. Elena squeezed Olivia's hand one last time before she and Rachel slipped out and closed the door behind them. And Olivia was left alone with the most powerful man in Chicago, her heart hammering in her chest. She had no idea why he was here in her hospital room, and that uncertainty frightened her more than anything. Dominic stopped in the middle of the room, keeping a careful distance from the bed as if he understood that coming too close too quickly might startle her. He stood tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored black suit, yet there was nothing overtly threatening in his posture, and in fact, there was something in the way he held himself, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel he was deliberately trying not to scare her. "And you are the nurse who saved Elena's life 2 years ago?" Dominic said, his voice low and even. Olivia blinked, startled that he knew that particular detail, and she remembered that day in an instant. Elena collapsing in the hallway, Olivia rushing to her side, beginning chest compressions and rescue breaths until the emergency team arrived. All of it just her job, an instinct honed by training, something she never imagined anyone would remember. "You know about that?" she asked, still unsteady. "I know everything about the people who have helped my family," Dominic replied. "Elena has been the private physician of the Russo family for nearly 20 years. When you saved her life, you indirectly saved the lives of everyone who depends on her. That is a debt I do not forget." Olivia had no idea how to respond. She had heard countless stories about Dominic Russo, stories of ruthlessness and unforgiving justice toward his enemies. But the man standing in front of her now did not match the monster of rumor. He was cold, yes, but not cruel for the sake of cruelty, powerful without the swaggering arrogance she had imagined. And in those storm-gray eyes she saw something she could never have expected to find. Pain. "I know what happened to you," Dominic went on, his voice still level, but each word weighted. "I know what Ryan Carter did. I know he watched you being attacked and walked away, and I know he planned to kill you from the very beginning." Fresh tears welled in Olivia's eyes, not from fear, but from the strange relief of hearing someone else finally speak aloud the truth she had been trying to deny. "But why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would a man like you help someone like me? I am nobody. I am just an orphan, no family, no one who cares." Dominic watched her for a long moment, and then his gaze dropped to the curve of her belly. When he looked back up, something in his eyes had shifted, the icy surface still there, but beneath it a deep, buried ache that had lain hidden for years. "Because no one deserves what has been done to you," he said slowly, as though weighing each word. "Because I owe you a debt. And more than that, because I once watched a pregnant woman being attacked in front of me and I could not stop it. I will not let that happen again. Not ever." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile, and Olivia understood that he was not only speaking about her. There was another story behind his words, an old wound that had never healed, and though she did not know its details, she knew it had carved the man he had become. "I will not hurt you," Dominic said, his tone softer now but still unshakably firm. "I will not let anyone else hurt you again. That is a promise." Olivia looked at him, at the man the entire city feared, the man she knew she ought to run from rather than trust. And yet in that moment, when she met his gaze and saw the quiet sincerity hidden beneath the armor of ice, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. She nodded, a small, tentative movement, as if placing whatever remained of her battered heart and her unborn child's future in the hands of a stranger. And for the first time since she had lain on that hospital floor with her world shattered, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she and the baby inside her might actually be all right. 1 week after her first meeting with Dominic, Olivia was finally cleared to leave the hospital. Her health stabilized, her blood pressure returned to normal, and the baby inside her still strong, announcing its presence with firm kicks each day. Yet as Nurse Rachel helped her gather the few belongings she owned, folding worn clothes into a small bag and tidying the room, Olivia was struck by a bitter truth that hit harder than any diagnosis. She had nowhere to go. The apartment she had once shared with Ryan now felt like a death trap, a place marked on some invisible map of danger, because Vanessa knew that address. And if that unhinged woman ever decided to come back and finish what she had started, that would be the first door she would pound on. Olivia had no family to take her in, no close friends she felt she could impose on, and the little money she had saved was nowhere near enough to rent a new place that would be even remotely safe. She stood by the hospital window, looking out at Chicago wrapped in white, snow lying heavy on the streets and rooftops, and felt more hopeless than she ever had before. The door opened and Dominic stepped inside, still in his familiar black suit, still carrying that quiet, overwhelming aura of power, though it no longer frightened her the way it had that first day. Over the past week he had come to see her every day, sometimes only to ask if she needed anything, sometimes simply to sit in silence in the corner while she rested, his presence becoming strangely familiar. A dark and steady shape in the background of her fragile recovery, and Olivia no longer felt the jittery unease she once had when he was near. "You are being discharged," Dominic said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "Where are you planning to go?" Olivia turned from the window and looked at him, her eyes tired and sad. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice barely more than a breath. "I cannot go back to the old apartment. Vanessa knows where it is, and I have nowhere else." Dominic nodded, as if this were the answer he had been expecting all along. "You will come to my house," he said, in a tone that left no room for argument. "You will be safe there. There is a private physician to monitor your pregnancy and staff to take care of you at all hours." Olivia's eyes widened, unable to quite believe what she had just heard. "I cannot live in the home of a mafia boss," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know you have done so much for me and I am grateful, but I cannot. It does not feel right." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes unreadable, then stepped a little closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its iron certainty. "You can, and you will," he said. "Until this is over, until Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins are brought to justice, you need to be somewhere safe. My estate is the safest place in Chicago. No one dares touch anyone under my roof." Olivia wanted to protest, wanted to say she could not accept such a vast favor from a man who was still almost a stranger, but when she looked into his eyes, she understood that he was not making a casual offer, he was making a decision. And somewhere deep inside, she knew he was right. She had no other options. If she walked out into the world alone with a belly 7 months heavy and no one to watch her back, she and her child would be easy prey for anyone who wished them harm. "All right," she said at last, giving a small, fragile nod. "I will go." That afternoon, a black Mercedes took her to the Russo estate, while the winter sun slipped down behind Chicago's towers, and the sky burned in shades of orange and red. And when the car slowed before the tall iron gates tipped with sharp points and the lines of snow-frosted ivy on either side, Olivia felt her heart race. She had seen photographs of this mansion in the paper, but seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. A grand structure of white marble columns and glass windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, a broad front garden now blanketed in snow, the whole place looking like some old-world palace dropped into a modern city. Yet when she stepped inside, it was not the luxury that stunned her, it was the warmth. She had imagined the home of a mafia boss would be cold and oppressive, shadowed halls and menacing paintings, but instead she walked into a wide foyer with honey-colored wood floors polished to a soft glow, peaceful landscapes hanging on the walls, a great stone fireplace crackling with orange flames that sent out gentle heat, and the faint, comforting fragrance of fresh flowers drifting from vases placed here and there. An older man stood waiting at the foot of the staircase, his hair white as snow, his face deeply lined, yet his eyes still bright and kind, and dressed in a gray sweater and dark slacks, he looked more like a kindly grandfather than a retired king of a criminal empire. "This is my father, Vincent Russo," Dominic said in his brief way. Vincent stepped forward and smiled at Olivia, a soft smile that did not quite erase the weariness in his features, but warmed them. "My son rarely brings anyone home," he said, his voice roughened by age but gentle. "You must be very special." Olivia had no idea how to answer such a thing. She only lowered her head, feeling a flush rise in her cheeks. Vincent looked at her with the gaze of a man who had seen far too much in life to judge anyone quickly. "Welcome to our home, Olivia," he said. "Please, think of this as your home too." She was shown to a room on the second floor, spacious and filled with soft daylight from a large window that looked out over Lake Michigan, the water a sheet of cold silver beneath the winter sky. The room had everything she might need: a deep, comfortable bed dressed in crisp white linens, a wardrobe already holding new clothes chosen to fit her pregnant body, and a private bathroom with a large tub and bottles of rich shampoo and conditioner lined up on a glass shelf. In those first days at the Russo estate, Olivia drew into herself like a frightened bird, staying mostly in her room, eating alone, reading alone, stepping out only when necessary. She still could not quite believe she was living in the house of the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, and some part of her remained afraid that all this kindness might come with a price she did not yet see. But as the days passed and nothing bad happened, as no one demanded anything from her, as she was met only with courtesy and space to breathe, she began to loosen the tight coil inside her. She started to leave her room more often, wandering the large house at unhurried pace, discovering a library lined with thousands of books, a music room with an old piano that gleamed softly in the low light, and a winter garden where green plants thrived in the shelter of glass while snow piled up outside. She began to join Vincent for dinner, listening as he told stories of Italy, of family, of the old days before the weight of responsibility had settled on his shoulders and on his sons. And as she listened, she started to realize that this was not a house built only of crime and shadows, but a home inhabited by people with complicated pasts who still carried something human and tender inside them. One night, unable to sleep, Olivia stepped out onto the balcony of her room and looked over the city of Chicago glittering with countless points of light, the snow having finally stopped, the sky clear and full of stars, Lake Michigan below reflecting the moon like some vast, silent mirror. She laid her hand over her belly, feeling the quiet movements of her child, and for the first time since her life had shattered on that hospital floor, she felt a strange calm spreading through her chest. She did not know what the future would bring, did not know how any of this would end, but in that moment, standing on the balcony of the Russo estate, with the cool night air brushing her hair and the city sparkling beyond, she felt safe, and that was something she had not felt in a very, very long time. 2 weeks passed at the Russo estate, and Olivia slowly grew used to her new life in ways she never could have imagined. She was still afraid, still aching from Ryan's betrayal, but the cold walls inside her had begun to soften, bit by bit, worn down by small moments she could not quite explain. Dominic was not a man of sweet words or romantic gestures. He was distant, sparing with speech, always keeping a careful space between them, as if afraid that stepping too close might send her fleeing. Yet his actions spoke with a quiet certainty that went deeper than any practiced line. On mornings when late pregnancy nausea made it impossible for her to face solid food, she would wake to find a steaming bowl of chicken soup on her bedside table. No note, no explanation, just the soup and a single small white rose laid beside it. She knew it came from Dominic, because no one else in that house would dare enter her room without knocking except him. On some afternoons, as she lay resting, she would hear the soft rustle of newspaper in the hallway, and when she cracked her door open, she would see him seated in a chair just outside her room, reading in silence like a steadfast sentry at his post. He did not look up, did not speak, but his presence there, a solid shape between her and the world, filled her with a strange, unexpected sense of safety. One evening, as she lay on her bed with her eyes half closed, she heard light footsteps and the whisper of the door opening. She kept still, pretending to sleep, and then she heard Dominic's voice, low and almost tender, so gentle she wondered if she were dreaming. He was talking to her belly. She could not make out every word, only small fragments like "stay strong and protect your mother," and her heart tightened until she could hardly breathe, fighting back tears she was not ready to let him see. That night, sleep would not come. She lay awake for hours, her thoughts circling Dominic, this strange household she now belonged to, the shadowed shape of her future and the tiny life moving within her, until at last she decided to step out onto the balcony for some air. When she eased the door open and stepped into the corridor, she realized she was not alone. At the far end, on the large, shared balcony, Dominic stood with his forearms resting on the railing, gazing out over Lake Michigan, silver and shimmering under the full moon. He was not in his usual suit, only a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and dark slacks. His black hair was slightly mussed, as though the night had kept him turning just as it had kept her. Olivia hesitated, thinking to retreat quietly to her room, but Dominic turned his head and saw her. "You cannot sleep?" he asked, his deep voice soft in the stillness. She nodded and walked slowly to stand near him, keeping a polite distance. For a long time they said nothing, both of them looking out at the lake lying perfectly still, a mirror for the moon and the spray of stars above. The night wind brushed cool fingers through her hair, and she drew her robe tighter around her shoulders. "My mother loved to stand on this balcony," Dominic said suddenly, his voice far away, as if he were reaching back through the years. "She used to say the moonlight on Lake Michigan was like diamonds scattered by the sky." Olivia turned to him in quiet surprise. It was the first time he had ever spoken about himself without being asked. "Your mother," she said gently. Dominic nodded, his eyes still on the water, but now there was a depth of sorrow in them that she had not seen before. "Isabella Russo," he said, and the way he spoke, her name carried both tenderness and pain. She was the most beautiful and gentle woman I have ever known. She could make this entire house feel bright just by smiling. Silence settled between them for a moment before he went on, his voice dropping lower, each word weighted with 26 years of grief. When I was 10, she was pregnant with my baby sister. She was so happy, always talking about the dresses she would sew, the lullabies she would sing. I was just as excited, dreaming about being a big brother, teaching her to ride a bike, protecting her from anyone who tried to hurt her. His voice shook, almost imperceptibly, and Olivia saw the muscles in his jaw tense as if he were holding back a tide. Then one day, my father's enemies came, he said. They did not dare face him directly, so they went after the easier target, my mother. I was home that day, playing in the living room when I heard screaming upstairs. I ran up and found her on the bedroom floor, her favorite blue dress soaked in blood. Even then, she was still trying to shield her belly, even as she was bleeding out. Olivia pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes burning with tears. My mother lost the baby that night, Dominic continued, his tone like frozen steel while his eyes shone red, and 3 days later she died. I held her hand until it went cold. I swore on her soul I would never again allow anything like that to happen to a pregnant woman. Not ever, not while I am still breathing. Now she understood. She understood why he had come for her, why he had watched over her, why his gaze held that strange mix of distance and hurt whenever she cradled her belly. She was not just a debt to be repaid or a vulnerable person to be protected. She was a chance for him to do what the 10-year-old boy he had once been could not do. A chance to stand between a woman and the violence that had once shattered his own world. I am so sorry for what you lost, Olivia said softly. And without thinking, she laid her small hand over the fist he had clenched on the railing. Dominic glanced down at the touch, at her fingers resting warm against his skin, then lifted his eyes to hers. In the soft gold of the moonlight, they simply looked at each other, neither speaking, because there was nothing left that needed to be said. In that quiet moment, two strangers with deep, hidden scars recognized in one another a pain only they could truly understand. 2 days after that night on the balcony, Luca called Dominic with the news he had been waiting to hear for weeks. "We found them, boss," Luca said. Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins were trying to cross into Mexico through Texas. They booked flights to Cancun under fake names, but our people at the airport recognized them. Dominic had been sitting in his office, but at those words he rose at once, a dangerous glint flaring in his storm-gray eyes. "Stop them," he ordered, his voice stripped of any ornament. "Bring them back to Chicago. I want to see them face to face." 12 hours later, a black truck rolled to a stop in front of an abandoned warehouse on the south side of the city, a place even the police preferred to ignore. This was Russo territory, where private conversations took place and never traveled beyond the walls. Luca and 4 men dragged Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins out of the vehicle, their hands cuffed, their mouths sealed with tape, and shoved them into the cold, dark space. Ryan was dumped onto a wooden chair in the center of the room, his wrists lashed hard to the armrests, his ankles tied to the legs. When the tape was ripped from his mouth, he did not scream, only panted in ragged breaths, his face ashen, sweat rolling in cold rivulets down his temples. His once expensive suit was wrinkled and filthy, his carefully styled hair now a tangled mess. He trembled uncontrollably, his wild eyes darting around like those of a cornered animal. Vanessa was taken into a small side room, her shrill screams leaking through the thin wall as she cursed and threatened and demanded to be released. But no one paid her the slightest attention. In this place, screaming meant nothing. The warehouse door creaked open, and Dominic walked in. He wore his usual black suit, his white shirt immaculate, his shoes gleaming. Each step rang steady against the concrete floor, slow, deliberate, like the heavy ticking of a clock running out of time. There was no hurry in him. He had all the time in the world. Ryan Carter had nowhere left to run. When Dominic stopped in front of the chair, Ryan lifted his gaze, eyes stretched wide with terror. He knew exactly who stood before him, and that knowledge made his shaking worse. Dominic Russo. A name that, in the underworld of Chicago, meant death. "Please," Ryan stammered, his voice fractured by fear. "Please, I do not know why I am here. There has been some mistake. I swear I have done nothing wrong." Dominic said nothing. He only stared down at the man bound before him, his storm-gray eyes as cold and sharp as blades. The silence lengthened, thick and suffocating, until Ryan began to babble. Finally, Dominic spoke, his voice cutting through the air with quiet precision, each word a sentence in itself. "You married her to kill her," he said. "You took out a $5 million life insurance policy in her name with yourself as the sole beneficiary. You stood by and watched your whore attack your pregnant wife, the woman carrying your child. You nodded to her and walked away as if your wife were trash. Every trace of color drained from Ryan's face. He had never imagined that Dominic would know everything, every planned detail of the scheme he had once considered flawless. "It was not me," Ryan sobbed, tears and mucus running down his face. "It was not my idea. Vanessa is crazy. She was jealous and she did it on her own. I did not tell her to attack Olivia. I swear, I did not know she was going to do that." Dominic took one step closer, closing the space between them until only a few inches remained. He leaned down, bringing his face close to Ryan's, and when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper, yet it froze the air. "You did not stop her," he said. "You nodded to her. You turned your back and walked away while your wife lay on the floor, bleeding, begging for her life. You had this plan before you ever married her. You chose her because she is an orphan, because no one would come looking if she simply vanished." Ryan was sobbing openly now, stripped of any charm or dignity, a far cry from the polished man who had seduced Olivia with tailored suits and smooth talk. "Please, I am begging you," he choked out. "Spare me. I will pay back every cent, I swear. I will disappear. I will never show my face in Chicago again. Please, I do not want to die." Dominic straightened, looking down at the man writhing in the chair. Every part of him screamed to end it right there, to avenge Olivia and the innocent child who had nearly been lost, to avenge his mother and the sister he had never known. His fist clenched so hard the knuckles turned white. This man deserved to die. But then Olivia's face rose in his mind, the warm brown of her eyes, the shy smile she gave when she spoke to her baby, the feel of her small hand resting over his on the balcony rail. What would she see if she looked at him after he killed Ryan with his own hands? How would she look at him, knowing he was a man who solved his pain with blood? For the first time in his life, Dominic wanted to be something better. For the first time, he wanted to be worthy of something pure. He turned away, stepping out of the circle of harsh light cast by the single bare bulb. "Call the police," he said to Luca, his voice cold and final. "Give them every piece of evidence we have. The videos, the messages, the insurance files, all of it. Let the law deal with them." Luca nodded without hesitation. Dominic walked out of the warehouse into the biting night, leaving behind the sound of Ryan's pleading cries echoing off the concrete. He had not killed him, not because Ryan deserved to live, but because Dominic wanted to become the kind of man Olivia could trust. The next morning, Marcus Webb, the Russo family lawyer, walked into the Chicago Police Department, carrying a black leather briefcase stuffed with documents, asked to see the head of the Major Crimes Unit, and was shown into the office of Detective Sarah Chen, a 38-year-old woman with neatly cropped black hair and the sharp eyes of someone who had spent her entire career chasing criminals. Sarah Chen was known as one of the most incorruptible detectives in Chicago, a woman who could not be bought and who never stopped until she found the truth. When Marcus set the briefcase on her desk and began taking out file after file, Sarah could not hide the flicker of surprise on her face. In nearly 20 years on the job, she had never seen such a complete, meticulously organized set of evidence handed over like this. "This concerns the assault on a pregnant woman at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital about 1 month ago," Marcus explained, his voice calm and professional. "My client wishes to ensure that justice is done, and I believe this evidence will be more than sufficient to prosecute the offenders." Sarah began to examine the files, and the more she read, the wider her eyes grew. The packet contained security footage from the hospital cameras showing, with brutal clarity, Vanessa Blair Collins storming into the hospital room and attacking Olivia Bennett, while Ryan Carter stood in the doorway and did nothing to stop her. The video also captured the precise moment Ryan nodded to Vanessa before the two of them walked away, leaving Olivia on the floor. There were also hundreds of text messages and emails between Ryan and Vanessa spanning the last 2 years, in which they discussed their plan in painstaking detail, from the way Ryan would approach and marry Olivia, to the purchase of the life insurance policy, to the timing and method by which she would be eliminated. The $5 million life insurance policy itself was in the file, bearing Olivia's forged signature, already confirmed as such by a handwriting expert. And finally, there was Ryan Carter's full criminal record, including 3 prior convictions for financial fraud under various aliases. "How did you obtain all of this?" Sarah asked, looking up at Marcus with a mix of admiration and suspicion. Marcus only gave a polite smile. "My client has many resources," he said, "and as I mentioned, they are very keen on seeing justice served." Within 24 hours, the Chicago police issued arrest warrants for Ryan Michael Carter and Vanessa Blair Collins. They were found at a small motel on the outskirts of the city, clearly waiting for an opportunity to flee after Dominic's men had released them. When the handcuffs snapped around their wrists and their Miranda rights were read, Ryan was still crying and blaming Vanessa, while Vanessa screamed and cursed Ryan as a coward, hurling every foul word she knew. News of their arrest spread like wildfire. Every television station in Chicago ran the story with sensational headlines. Pregnant woman attacked in hospital. Husband charged as accomplice. Reporters stood outside the police station, outside street. Michael's memorial, outside the courthouse, delivering breathless updates on every new development. At the Russo estate, Olivia sat on the living room sofa, her eyes fixed on the television as the evening news anchor spoke. She watched Ryan's face on the screen, watched the police lead him away in a rumpled, broken state that looked nothing like the polished man who had charmed her 3 years earlier, watched Vanessa with her tangled red hair screaming at the cameras like a madwoman, and then saw her own picture, an old staff photo from the hospital records, appear on the screen with the word victim beneath it. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She pressed one palm over her belly, where her baby kicked lightly as if to comfort her, and tears slipped down her cheeks. But this time they were not tears of pain or fear. Dominic sat down beside her on the sofa without a word. He did not attempt to soothe her with hollow phrases, did not ask if she was all right when she was clearly crying. He simply sat there, his shoulder close enough to almost touch hers, his presence like an anchor that kept her from being swept away by the storm of emotions rising inside her. "It is really happening," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling but carrying a note of relief she had not felt in a very long time. "They will pay for what they did." "They will," Dominic answered, his voice deep and certain. "I have made sure of that." Olivia turned to look at him, at the man who had saved her, protected her, and delivered a justice she never believed she would see. In the gentle light of the living room, she gazed into his storm-gray eyes and saw something she had not noticed before, a kind of care, a gentle concern hidden behind his icy exterior, and perhaps, just perhaps, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. "Thank you," she said, barely more than a breath, "for everything you have done." Dominic did not reply with words. He simply inclined his head, and in that moment, as their eyes met, Olivia felt her heart stumble in her chest. 1 month passed after Ryan and Vanessa were arrested, and at last the date of the trial was set. Olivia received the call from the prosecutor's office one afternoon while she was sitting in the Russo library, reading. The woman on the other end was polite but all business, explaining that although the evidence against Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins was already strong, the direct testimony of the victim would carry tremendous weight with the jury and help secure the harshest possible sentence. They needed Olivia to come to court and testify. When the call ended, Olivia remained motionless in the armchair, her phone still clutched in her hand, feeling as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. To testify in court meant she would have to face Ryan. She would have to look into the eyes of the man who had betrayed her in the cruelest way, the man who had stood and watched as she was attacked and then turned his back on her. She would have to recount every detail of that day in front of hundreds of strangers, in front of cameras, in front of the world. The thought made her shake down to her bones. Dominic found her still sitting in the library after dark. He did not ask what had happened, because he already knew. There was nothing about this case he was not informed of. He took the chair opposite hers, his storm-gray eyes resting on her with a concern he no longer bothered to hide. "You do not have to do this," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "The evidence is enough to convict them. No one can force you to take the stand if you do not want to." Olivia did not answer. She only looked down at her hands folded over the taut curve of her belly, now heavy with nearly 9 months of pregnancy, and kept her silence. That night she did not sleep. She lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, until she could not bear it any longer and swung her legs over the side. She paced the room, from the window to the door and back again, her steps heavy on the thick carpet. The baby seemed to sense her turmoil, kicking in a steady rhythm, small insistent taps as if to remind her she was not alone. She stopped at the window and looked out at Chicago, swallowed in darkness, and memories of her childhood rushed in, unstoppable. She remembered the years at Street, Agnes Orphanage, remembered herself as a thin, timid girl who always tried to shrink into the corners and become invisible so the bullies would pass her by. She remembered the times when the older children had mocked her, yanked her hair, stolen her food, and she had never once dared to fight back. She had only lowered her head, swallowed her tears, and run away, and she had lived her whole life like that, always running, always silent, always letting other people decide her fate. When she met Ryan, she had done the same, refusing to face the warning signs, choosing to close her eyes rather than confront the truth. And the result was that she had almost lost her life, had almost lost the child who had not even been born. Olivia laid a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movements within, and a thought pierced her mind with a clarity she had never known before. She was about to become a mother. She was about to bring into this world a small, fragile life that would look to her to learn how to live, how to confront hardship, how to fight for itself. What did she want to teach her child? That you run when danger appears, that you stay silent when you are treated unjustly, that you let fear decide who you are. No, she did not want her child to grow up with those lessons. She wanted her child to know that its mother was a brave woman who had stood up to the people who hurt her and demanded justice. She wanted her child to be proud of her. The next morning, Olivia went to find Dominic in his office. He was reviewing documents when she stepped inside, and he looked up at her with a flicker of surprise. "I will testify," Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I need to face him. For myself, for my baby. I cannot let fear control me anymore." Dominic studied her for a long moment, and she saw in his storm-gray eyes something she had never seen there before: admiration. "You are braver than you think," he said quietly. Olivia gave him a small, sad smile that still held a thread of steel. "I have to be brave," she said. "I am about to be a mother." In the days that followed, Marcus Webb came to the estate every day to prepare her. He coached her on how to answer the prosecutor's questions, how to handle the harsh, twisting questions from the defense, how to keep her composure when she had to look Ryan and Vanessa in the eye. They practiced again and again, until Olivia could tell her story without tears, without shaking, with nothing left but clear, simple truth. The night before the trial, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw a young woman with long brown hair, hazel eyes marked by suffering yet shining with new strength, and a rounded belly heavy with the promise of another life. She placed both hands over that curve, drew a long breath, and whispered to herself and to the child within, "You survived. You can do this." And for the first time, she truly believed her own words. On the morning of the trial, the Chicago sky was a flawless blue, as if the day itself were waiting for justice to be done. The Cook County Courthouse rose in the center of the city, an old stone building with massive columns and wide steps leading up to the main doors. Reporters and camera crews had gathered since dawn, clustered on the front steps to capture every image of the people at the heart of the case that had shaken the entire city. Dominic's black Mercedes pulled up at a rear entrance, far from the crowd. Olivia stepped out, wearing a simple black dress that followed the line of her belly. Now almost 9 months round, her brown hair pinned up neatly, a light touch of makeup softening the shadows left by many sleepless nights. She drew a deep breath, lifted her chin, and walked into the courthouse with steady steps. Dominic walked just behind her, Luca at her side, 2 living walls guarding her from whatever might be waiting. Courtroom 12 was already packed when Olivia entered. She was led to the witness bench, while Dominic took a seat directly behind her, his gray eyes never leaving her even for an instant, his presence an anchor holding her steady in the swell of fear and memory. When she looked toward the defense table, her heart stumbled once, then steadied. Ryan sat there, thinner than when she had last seen him, his face gaunt, deep shadows under his eyes, his once immaculate suit wrinkled and hanging loose on his frame. Beside him sat Vanessa, her once glossy red hair dull and tangled, her pale face bare of makeup, her eyes wild like those of a caged animal. They looked like ghosts of their former selves, and Olivia realized she was no longer afraid of them. The proceedings began with the formalities, and then the prosecutor requested that the video evidence be shown. A large screen was lowered, and the room dimmed as footage from the hospital security cameras began to play. Olivia watched herself on the screen, lying in the hospital bed, her belly clearly rounded, and then she saw Vanessa burst in, saw her own body jerk under the attack, saw Ryan standing in the doorway doing nothing. She saw that precise moment when he nodded, the moment when they both turned and walked away, the moment when she fell to the floor and lay there alone as alarms screamed. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Somewhere in the gallery, someone began to cry. Even the judge had to set his pen down and draw a slow breath before calling the next witness. When Olivia's turn came, she rose, her legs trembling slightly but carrying her forward. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, and sat down facing the room. Her gaze drifted over the faces watching her, pausing for a heartbeat on Dominic, who gave a small nod that felt like a hand at her back. Then she began to speak. Her voice shook at first as she described that day, the terror when Vanessa rushed in, the desperation as she begged Ryan to save her, but she did not stop. She spoke of the cold emptiness in Ryan's eyes, of that small, deliberate nod, of the way he turned and walked away as if she were trash, as if she were nothing. He stood there, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. He watched. And then he walked away as though I meant nothing at all. She is lying, Ryan suddenly shouted from the defense table, his face twisted with rage and panic. She is lying about everything. I am innocent. 2 court officers moved at once, forcing him back into his seat, ordering him to be quiet. The judge banged his gavel and sternly warned the defendant against further outbursts. Vanessa sat beside him, staring at Ryan with a look of pure hatred, as if she were laying all of this at his feet. After all the witnesses had been heard and both sides had made their final arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. 2 long hours crept by in suffocating tension. Olivia sat in a waiting room, her hands resting on her belly, while Dominic stood by the window, saying nothing but never leaving. When the jury returned, the courtroom again filled to the brim, every breath held. The foreperson rose, voice clear and firm. On the charge of aggravated battery causing injury to a pregnant woman, in the case of the defendant Vanessa Blair Collins, the jury finds the defendant guilty. We recommend a sentence of 15 years in prison. On the charges of accomplice to aggravated battery, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and insurance fraud, in the case of the defendant Ryan Michael Carter, the jury finds the defendant guilty. We recommend a sentence of 20 years in prison. Vanessa collapsed forward onto the table, sobbing. Ryan exploded. He lurched to his feet, shouting curses, straining against the hands of the officers. "This is wrong," he screamed. "Olivia, you will pay for this. Do you hear me? You will pay." Dominic rose at once and stepped in front of Olivia, placing himself between her and the man who had once shared her bed. A wall of muscle and iron no one could pass. He watched Ryan struggling as the officers dragged him toward the door, his storm-gray eyes cold and sharp. "It is over," Dominic said quietly, in a voice only Ryan could hear, and the words fell like a final sentence beyond any appeal. Ryan was hauled out of the courtroom, his furious shouts fading and then disappearing as the heavy doors slammed shut. Olivia stood there amid the chaos, journalists calling out questions, cameras clicking in rapid bursts, people talking all at once, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. But these were not tears of grief or terror. They were tears of release, of relief. The tears of someone who had walked through fire, and at last could see the light waiting on the other side. The black Mercedes slipped away from the courthouse through the rear exit, far from the knot of reporters still swarming the main steps. And inside the car, Olivia and Dominic sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and laying warm bands of light across Olivia's face, though she barely noticed, her gaze fixed on the streets of Chicago drifting past outside as if she were watching someone else's life in a dream. Then, without warning, the tension inside her cracked. At first a single tear slid down her cheek, then another, and another, until she could no longer contain it, and sobs broke loose from her chest, her shoulders shaking, her breath hitching in ragged bursts, the sounds that tore from her throat like waves shattering against a stone shore. Dominic turned to look at her, and for a heartbeat his storm-gray eyes held a flicker of panic. He was a mafia boss, a man trained to face enemies, not tears, his entire world built around confronting threat, not comforting pain, and he had no script for moments like this. He motioned for Luca to pull over, and the Mercedes eased to the curb on a quiet side street. For a while, the only sounds were Olivia's sobs and the low hum of the idling engine. Dominic watched the tremor in her shoulders, the tears soaking into the fabric of her black dress, and felt something tighten sharply in his chest. At last he reached out and set his hand on her shoulder, his palm large and warm, a wordless reassurance resting there. "It is over," he said softly, his voice low and steady like a church bell in the hush of late afternoon. "You are free." Olivia lifted her face to him through a blur of tears, her hazel eyes red-rimmed and shining. For a long moment she did not speak, only looked into the storm-gray gaze that now held a tenderness she had never seen in him before. "Thank you," she whispered at last, her voice hoarse from crying. "For everything. For saving me. For believing me." Dominic did not answer with words. He simply dipped his head in a small nod, but his hand remained on her shoulder, firm and protective. When the car stopped in front of the Russo estate, Vincent was already waiting on the front steps. He watched Olivia climb out with her eyes still swollen from tears, but a quiet smile pulling at her lips, and a rare smile softened the network of lines on his own face. He stepped forward, took her hand in his, and told her in his rough yet gentle voice that justice had been done, that she could rest easy now. A week passed after the trial, and life in the Russo mansion gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm, but Olivia soon noticed something strange. Dominic had begun to avoid her. He no longer came to sit outside her door with the morning paper, no longer appeared in the doorway with a steaming bowl of soup when nausea stole her appetite, no longer lingered beside her in the evenings. Instead, whenever she walked into a room, he would find some reason to leave, and whenever their eyes accidentally met, he would be the first to look away. She did not understand why, and the sting of that distance hurt more than she had expected. Vincent was the first to see what was happening. One evening he found Dominic alone in his office, staring out the window with a thundercloud on his face, and he stepped in, closing the door behind him, the sharp old gaze of a man who had seen too much turning on his son. "You are in love with her, are you not?" Vincent asked bluntly, wasting no time on gentle approaches. Dominic did not turn around, but his shoulders tensed. Silence stretched between them before he finally replied, his voice low and tired. "She has been through enough," he said. "She does not need a man like me. I am Mafia, father. I have blood on my hands. She deserves something better, a better man, someone who can give her the ordinary life she has always wanted." Vincent sighed and stepped up beside him. "Maybe she is exactly what you need," he said quietly. "And maybe you are exactly what she needs. You saved her, you protected her, you brought her justice. Where else is she going to find that? What normal man could ever do for her what you have already done?" Dominic did not answer, but Vincent could tell his words had landed. He squeezed his son's shoulder and left him there, alone with his thoughts. Later that night, Olivia found Dominic in the library. He was standing by the tall window, staring out at Lake Michigan glimmering in the moonlight, and he did not hear her enter until she spoke. "You are avoiding me," she said, not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact. Dominic turned, his storm-gray eyes meeting her warm hazel ones. "I thought you would want to move on," he said after a moment. "The trial is over. Ryan and Vanessa will be in prison for a long time. You no longer need my protection. You can start a new life, a normal life, far away from my world." Olivia held his gaze for a long beat, then began to walk toward him. Step by careful step, she crossed the space between them, until only a few inches remained. "What if I do not want to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I want to stay here, with you?" Dominic looked at her, at this small woman with her nearly 9-month belly, her eyes luminous in the moonlight, and felt the walls he had been building around his heart for 26 years begin to crumble. He lifted his hand and gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. When she did not pull back, he bent his head and pressed his mouth to hers. The kiss was feather-light and hesitant, soft as spring air, yet it carried all the feeling they had both been holding back for so long. When they finally drew apart, Olivia opened her eyes and smiled. Truly smiled. The first unshadowed smile she had worn since stepping into this house. And Dominic, the man who had not truly smiled since the day his mother died, found a smile tugging at his own lips in answer. 2 weeks after that first kiss in the library, in the pale hush of early morning, as dawn touched the edge of the Chicago skyline, Olivia woke with a sharp pain cutting across her belly. She lay still for a moment, thinking it might be more of the false contractions she had been enduring in recent days. But when the second pain rolled through, stronger and closer together, she knew this was different. Their daughter was ready to be born. She reached over and shook Dominic's shoulder. He came awake instantly, a lifetime of danger training him to go from sleep to full alert in a breath. But when Olivia told him she was in labor, all the legendary calm that made him feared in the underworld evaporated like mist in the sun. He leapt out of bed, nearly tripped over the blankets, and began to rush around the room like a man who had forgotten how to think, grabbing his phone and then putting it down, opening the door and closing it again, words tumbling from his mouth in half-finished sentences. Luca arrived at a run, drawn by the commotion, and stared in disbelief at the sight of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, reduced to a frantic first-time father. "You drive," Dominic ordered, or perhaps begged, as they helped Olivia carefully down the stairs. "My hands are shaking too much to hold the wheel." The black Mercedes flew through the quiet morning streets, its horn blaring as if it carried a head of state, and at St. Michael's Memorial, Elena was already waiting, summoned by Luca's call. Olivia was taken straight into the delivery room, and Dominic followed every step, his fingers locked around hers as though he feared she might disappear if he let go. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and waiting, Olivia moaning through each contraction, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead, while Dominic sat at her side, gripping her hand and murmuring encouragement he never knew he had in him. He had faced enemies without flinching, stared into the eyes of death without a tremor, but watching the woman he loved in such agony made him feel more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. And then, at last, after what felt like forever, a baby's cry rang out, thin and strong and sharp enough to split the tension in the room, and relief washed through everyone like a warm tide. "Doctor." Elena smiled as she placed the wriggling, red-faced infant into Olivia's arms and announced that the baby girl was healthy and strong, weighing 6 pounds and 5 ounces. Olivia looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face with closed eyes and petal-pink lips, and tears spilled down her cheeks once more, this time not from pain or fear but from the purest joy she had ever known. She bent and kissed the baby's forehead, whispering the first words of love a mother speaks. Dominic stood beside them, his eyes bright and wet as he watched mother and child, this mafia boss, this man the whole city feared, the man who had not shed a tear since his mother died 26 years ago, now letting tears slide freely down his cheeks without even trying to hide them. "Her name is Hope," Olivia said, lifting her gaze to him, her smile radiant. "Because that is what you gave me, Hope." Dominic bent and kissed Olivia's forehead, then pressed a second kiss to the downy crown of baby Hope's head. "And you have given me everything I did not know I needed," he murmured, his voice raw. 1 year later, the Russo estate rang with laughter and joy it had not known since the days of Isabella Russo. Olivia stood on the balcony outside their bedroom, looking down into the garden where Dominic held Hope in his arms. The little girl, now a year old with brown hair like her mother and gray eyes like her father, was giggling, her small hands patting at Dominic's cheeks as she babbled, "Dada," while Vincent sat in a lawn chair at the edge of the lawn, grinning so widely it erased years from his face. He had laughed more in this past year than in the previous 26 combined. Olivia smiled as she watched them, her family. She had once been an unloved orphan, raised in scarcity and loneliness, betrayed by the very man she had trusted most, nearly killed and almost robbed of the child she carried. And yet now she had a home. Not a perfect family by the world's standards, not a tidy little life with a 9-to-5 husband and a house in the suburbs, but a family nonetheless, fierce and tender, made up of people who would do anything to protect her. "We made it, Hope," she whispered, watching her daughter laugh in Dominic's arms. "We really made it." And for the first time in her life, Olivia understood what it meant to feel truly safe, not because of high walls or armed guards, but because she was loved, fiercely, completely, without conditions. The story of Olivia and Dominic has reached its end, but the lessons it leaves behind will go on echoing in the hearts of each of us. It is a story about the power of love, about the way light can rise out of the darkest places, and about never surrendering hope no matter how harsh the circumstances life throws us into. Olivia has taught us that the past does not define the future, that no matter what kind of life you were born into, you are still worthy of love and happiness. Dominic has shown that people can change, that even a heart that seems frozen solid can begin to melt when it meets the right person. In real life, we may never have a mafia boss appear to rescue us the way he did in this story, but the lessons about standing up after we have fallen, about finding the courage to face those who have hurt us, and about opening our hearts to new love after betrayal are all things we can carry into our everyday lives. Dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to tap like and share this video so that more people can hear stories as moving as this one. We would truly love to know how you feel about Olivia and Dominic's journey. Have you ever gone through betrayal? And how did you find your way through it? Do you believe in love that arrives from the most unexpected places? Please leave a comment below and share the feelings that come from deep inside your heart. We read each and every message, and we deeply value everything you choose to share with us. Thank you, sincerely, for spending your time with this story from beginning to end. We wish all of you who are watching this video good health, a life filled with joy, and days that are bright and gentle. May you always find peace in your own soul and happiness in the simplest of things. For now, we say goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next videos, with even more touching and meaningful stories to share.